You know that feeling when you get excited about a new project? Maybe you want to start a business, learn a new skill, or finally write that book you've been thinking about. So you do what any smart person would do. You start researching. You watch YouTube videos, you read articles, you compare methods, you download guides, you join forums, you create elaborate spreadsheets comparing different approaches. And then weeks pass, maybe months, and you still haven't actually started. Here's the thing that might sting a little. All that research, it wasn't really about gathering information, it was about avoiding the one thing that actually scares you: beginning. If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not lazy, you're not a procrastinator in the way you think, and there's actually a fascinating psychological mechanism behind this pattern. Today, I want to show you why your brain gets stuck in research mode, what's really happening beneath the surface, and most importantly, how to break the cycle without abandoning the thoughtful, thorough approach that makes you who you are. Because here's what you need to understand. This isn't about forcing yourself to just do it. It's about recognizing what your nervous system is actually trying to protect you from. Let's dive in. First, let me validate something important. You're not broken. Your brain is actually doing something incredibly sophisticated. It's just working against your conscious goals. What you're experiencing is called analysis paralysis in popular psychology, but there's something deeper happening. Your endless research is a form of what psychologists call productive procrastination. It feels like progress because you're learning, planning, and preparing. Your brain gets little dopamine hits every time you discover a new piece of information. You feel smart, thorough, responsible. But here's the revelation. Research has become a buffer between you and vulnerability. Think about it. When you're researching, you're still in the safe zone. You can't fail at something you haven't started. You can't be judged for work you haven't shared. You can't discover you're not as good at this as you hoped because you're still preparing. Your brain has essentially found the perfect loophole. It gets to feel productive without facing the emotional risk of actually creating something imperfect, being seen, or potentially failing. And this is where it gets really interesting. Let me explain what's actually going on neurologically and psychologically when you get stuck in research mode. The perfectionism anxiety loop. Your nervous system perceives starting as a threat, not a physical threat, but a psychological one. When you imagine putting your work out there, imperfect, incomplete, potentially criticized, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, lights up the same way it would if you were facing social rejection or physical danger. This triggers your stress response, and when you're in a stress response, your brain desperately seeks safety. Research feels like safety because it's familiar, controlled, and consequence-free. Here's the fascinating part. Every time you find a new piece of information, your brain releases a small amount of dopamine. It's the same neurochemical reward you get from checking social media or getting a text message. So you're literally getting chemically rewarded for staying in research mode, while starting feels anxious and uncomfortable. This creates what behavioral psychologists call a reinforcement pattern. Research equals comfort and reward. Starting equals discomfort and uncertainty. Your brain will naturally choose research every single time. The illusion of control. There's another layer here. Research gives you the illusion of control in an uncertain situation. When you don't know if you'll succeed at something, gathering more information feels like you're reducing that uncertainty. But here's the hard truth. No amount of research will eliminate the uncertainty of actually doing something new. The only way to know if your business will work, if you can write that book, if you're capable of learning that skill, is to start and find out. Information gathering becomes a form of magical thinking. If I just learn enough, I'll be guaranteed to succeed. But that guarantee doesn't exist, and on some level, you know this. So you keep researching, hoping to reach a threshold of knowledge that finally feels safe enough. That threshold never comes. The identity protection mechanism. Let me explain what most people don't realize. Chronic research can also be protecting your identity and self-concept. Let me explain. Right now, while you're still researching, you get to maintain the story that you could be successful if you wanted to. You could write that novel. You could start that business. You could learn that language. The potential is still intact. But the moment you actually start and create something imperfect, that potential gets tested against reality. And what if reality doesn't match the story you've been telling yourself about who you could be? This is terrifying for your nervous system, so it keeps you researching, keeping the dream safe and untested. I want to be gentle here, but also honest with you. Every month you spend researching is a month you're not building skills through actual practice. It's a month you're not failing forward, discovering what works through trial and error, or developing the resilience that only comes from real-world experience. The research phase feels productive, but it's producing knowledge without wisdom. Wisdom only comes from applied experience. And there's an emotional cost too. Deep down, you know you're avoiding something. That knowledge creates a low-level anxiety that follows you around. It whispers that you're not enough, that you're stuck, that you're wasting time. This erodes your self-trust and self-respect in subtle but cumulative ways. I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because recognizing the real cost makes change feel more urgent and necessary. Okay, so how do we actually solve this? How do you move from endless preparation to messy, imperfect action? Tool 1. Set a research deadline. Here's your first practical step. Give yourself a specific time-bound research period. Not infinite, not until I feel ready, a concrete deadline. For example, I will research podcast equipment for 3 days. On day 4, I will buy something and record my first episode. The key is making the timeline shorter than feels comfortable. If your instinct says you need 2 weeks of research, give yourself 4 days. Your brain will resist this. That resistance is the point. You're teaching it that discomfort is survivable. Tool 2. The good enough principle. Here's your next practical tool. Embracing what I call the good enough principle. Before you start researching, write down what good enough looks like. For example, a good enough first YouTube video is one where the audio is clear and I share one useful idea. It doesn't need professional editing, perfect lighting, or viral-worthy content. This creates a floor, not a ceiling. You're defining the minimum viable version. Because here's the truth. Your first attempt at anything will be mediocre compared to what you'll create after 6 months of practice. So make your peace with mediocrity now and let it teach you. Tool 3. Schedule creation sessions first. Here's a pattern interrupt that really works. Before you research anything, schedule your first creation session in your calendar. Make it real. Give it a specific time and date. Then, and only then, allow yourself limited research in service of that creation session. For example, I'm writing the first chapter of my book next Saturday morning from 9 to 11 a.m. This week, I can research story structure for 30 minutes per day to prepare for that session. This flips the script. Research becomes the supporting actor, not the star. Creation becomes the anchor. Tool 4. The 70% rule. This one comes from military decision-making strategies. Act when you have 70% of the information you think you need. Why 70%? Because that's usually the point where additional research yields diminishing returns. Beyond that threshold, you're mostly researching to feel safe, not to actually gain useful knowledge. Ask yourself, do I have enough information to take one small step forward? If yes, that's your cue to move. Exposure therapy for imperfection. This might sound strange, but deliberately creating something bad can be incredibly therapeutic for your nervous system. Give yourself permission to make something terrible. Record a podcast episode that's awkward. Write a blog post that's poorly structured. Draw something ugly. Share it with one trusted friend, or just keep it private. The point is to prove to your nervous system that creating imperfect work is not actually dangerous. You will survive the discomfort. This retrains your threat response. And here's a psychological technique that's surprisingly powerful. Write down exactly what you're afraid will happen if you start before you feel ready. Be specific. People will think I'm stupid. I'll discover I'm not actually talented. It will be harder than I expected, and I'll give up. Now read those fears out loud. Acknowledge them. Thank your brain for trying to protect you. And then ask, what's the evidence for this fear? And even if this fear came true, could I handle it?
Often, the fear loses its power when you drag it into the light. I need to acknowledge something important. If you have ADHD, OCD, or certain anxiety disorders, the research loop can be more complex than what I've described here. For people with ADHD, the dopamine-seeking behavior might be more intense, and executive function challenges can make initiating tasks especially difficult. If this resonates, consider working with a therapist who specializes in ADHD and can help you build scaffolding around task initiation. And for people with OCD tendencies, the research might feel compulsive rather than just avoidant. You might need to check one more source, verify one more fact, create one more perfect plan. If the researching feels driven by intrusive thoughts or intense anxiety, that's worth exploring with a mental health professional. And for those with trauma histories, especially around being criticized, judged, or shamed for mistakes, this pattern might be a protective response to past pain. That's valid.
Or mastered skills? They didn't wait until they felt ready. They started scared, confused, and underprepared, and then the act of doing the thing taught them what they needed to know. You don't learn to swim by reading about swimming. You learn by getting in the water and flailing around until your body figures it out. The same is true for any skill or project you're researching right now. What if instead of asking, "Am I ready?" you started asking, "What's one small step I can take with what I know right now?" That question changes everything. Because readiness isn't something you achieve before you begin, it's something you build through the messy process of beginning. So here's where we are. You've learned that your research habit isn't really about information, it's about protection. Your brain is trying to keep you safe from vulnerability, judgment, and the discomfort of being a beginner. You've learned the neurological and psychological mechanisms that keep you stuck in this loop. The dopamine rewards, the anxiety avoidance, the identity protection, the illusion of control. And you've learned specific, actionable tools to break the pattern. Research deadlines, the good enough principle, scheduling creation first, the 70% rule, exposure therapy, and externalizing your fears. But here's the most important thing. You get to decide right now whether you want to keep gathering information or start building experience. I'm not saying research is bad. I'm not saying planning is wrong. I'm saying that at some point, the most valuable information you can get is the feedback that comes from trying, failing, adjusting, and trying again. That feedback loop, it's called living. It's called creating. It's called becoming the person who doesn't just think about doing things, but actually does them. So here's my invitation to you. Pick one thing you've been researching, just one, and within the next 48 hours, take one tiny, imperfect action toward actually doing it. Not researching it, doing it. Maybe it's recording 60 seconds of that podcast. Maybe it's writing 200 messy words of that book. Maybe it's sending one email to a potential client. Maybe it's sketching one terrible drawing. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that you prove to yourself that you can survive starting before you feel ready. Because I promise you, the version of you that you want to become is waiting on the other side of that first messy step. And they're not perfect, they're not fully prepared, but they're real, and they're building something. Are you ready to meet them?